Good afternoon. So my project is on the Magna Carta and its influence on the English national identity. What I'm going to be talking to you about today is the research that I've done in England as part of this honors project and my findings. So the English national identity is made up of a different substance than other national identities. Take, for instance, the Greeks. They find their national identity in their national epic, the work of Homer, the Odyssey and the Iliad. So they are Greek because they have this one thing that they share as a group of people. The English do not have something like a national epic or another binding force like this. It's simply made up of something else. So what is the English national identity made out of? I believe that it is made up of rights and freedoms and privileges that they share and enjoy as English people. It's not tea and crumpets, and it's not the Queen. So what is it that makes you English? So I believe that the Magna Carta was instrumental in developing this system of rights and freedoms because it's the establishment of their constitutional system. And this is a lovely picture of me at Runnymede. As part of my research, I was able to travel to England and see these sites, and I walked 3 miles in the rain to see that. Just wanted to throw that out there. So why did I use my grant to go to England and research? There are many benefits of studying in country. Some of those benefits include experiencing life the way the English people do. We're all very similar to the English people because they played a very key part in establishing our nation. So there's a little similarity there, but it's a bit different as well because they still live their lives a little differently than we do, which is why we're not still part of England. So it's very eye-opening to see what it is like to live their life and to see it for yourself while you're researching these projects. And another wonderful thing that I was able to use while I was there is the British Library, which is sort of the equivalent of our Library of Congress. It's their National Archive, and there are resources there that you can't get anywhere else. And I was able to use a lot of really invaluable things that I gained from them. And that is the ID card that they gave me. I had to show my passport and my driver's license and several other proof of identity, and now I have a lovely souvenir thanks to the SCICU and their grant money. So essentially, how did the English come to have this national identity? If you'll just sort of warp back in time with me a bit, I believe that their national identity their national history, began again at the Norman Conquest. So before the Norman Conquest, they were a collection of Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, and they were different types of people groups. So you had the Normans, the Britons, the Northumbrians, the regular Umbrians. And at the Norman Conquest, William the Conqueror in 1066 came down and said, I'm going to establish one unified rule throughout England. So this is the first time that all of these small kingdoms are united under one rule, and their national history essentially begins over again because this is the England that we think of today. So this is the first time a diverse group of people were united under the same rule. They were very similar people, but they were not the same. Case in point, they liked to fight each other quite a bit before this. So that was William the Conqueror on the last slide, if you will. This is King John. So in 1215, everything has started to essentially come to a point of stability where the English people are used to this rule. They're accustomed to living under a united king. And in 1215, King John had become sort of a tyrant, and they did not take very well to this. So they said, King John, we have certain rights and privileges as nobility. We deserve your respect. This is part of our culture. This is part of our tradition. It's how it's always been. And he didn't really want to agree to that. So they decided to rebel, and that was acceptable as part of their culture. If a king was being tyrannical, they had the ability to come and say, you're not treating us according to tradition and according to what's right, so we're going to take what's ours from you. And that's how essentially the Magna Carta came into being. And if you want to look at it the way they looked at the Bible, like King Saul, by turning away from God and not doing what's right, God sent a replacement in David. And so they had this sort of worldview going into establishment of the Magna Carta. So, as I said before, these rights and freedoms and privileges that the nobility were expecting from King John were established in the tradition. The tradition is still something that's very important to the English today, as they don't necessarily have a written constitution. They have a body of documents, and according to tradition, this body of documents is their constitution. So the Magna Carta is the first written declaration of rights and freedoms in England, and it's the beginning of this body of documents that has become so important to the English people. So there are two ways to view this situation in history, and that's a large part of my project, is distinguishing between the two camps that are the main viewpoints. There are other views certainly, but these are the most prominent. So you have the traditional on the left-hand side of the screen. So they believe that this is the origin of formally recorded written rights. What does that mean? This is the first time anybody has written into law what they deserved as people, and that had the opportunity to grow into more rights and freedoms for more people later on. They believed that it inspired the idea that rights were available for all people. So as part of the Magna Carta, eventually rights and freedoms came down the line from the nobility to hire servants, and then eventually you see the abolition of slavery, etc. in England. And a lot of people trace this idea of people being valuable and deserving of rights back to this initial documentation. And the traditional view, another important thing that they also believe is that the king had no respect for the nobility, and revolt was required at this stage. There was no other means of action to regain their rights. On the other side of the argument is the revisionist school of thought on the right-hand side of the screen. So they believed that the nobles were simply undermining the monarchy because they wanted more power, and they said, King John, we want your stuff. And King John just didn't want to give it to them. But that's in contrast to the idea that King John had infringed on their rights. The revisionist school of thought also says that there are myth makers who came later on, especially during the period of the Glorious Revolution and the establishment of the Bill of Rights in 17th century England, when they wanted something to use as an example of nationalism. So these people in Parliament are accused of coming and saying, digging something out of the filing cabinet and saying, here, let me dust this off and use this as a banner of nationalism and people's rights, when it had not necessarily been that before. And they also say that this document is simply a feudal document, that it has no long-standing symbolism, and there was no intention for it to extend to more people later on. However, I disagree. I agree with the traditional side because it has been around for centuries, and the revisionist school of thought has only gained popularity in the 20th century, for the most part, is when it became popular. So in conclusion, my research findings were that I believe that the traditional school of thought is correct, partially because it's been around quite a bit longer than the revisionist school of thought, but also because there are many opportunities that people have used throughout time to use the Magna Carta as the establishment of their freedoms and rights. And they've used it in court cases, and they've also used it as essentially the starting point. So every other document that people cite in the constitutional system had its starting point with the Magna Carta. So I do believe that the Magna Carta has greatly contributed to this English national identity of rights and freedoms because it is the beginning of their constitutional system. And I do believe that their identity is based in rights and freedoms, much like the American identity is, because there's not another single binding force that I could find in my research, such as a national epic or a cultural element, such as you would find like a tribal element, perhaps in another culture where people are bound together by the way they eat their food and the way they dress, etc. In England, what binds them is their constitution. And I'd like to give some special thanks to the SCICU for paying for my plane ticket to go to England. That was very fun. And this is a picture of me outside of the tent where they house one of the original Magna Cartas from 1215 in Salisbury Cathedral. So thanks to my dad for taking that picture. I'd like to thank Dr. Myers, my mentor, my committee members, Professor Kirk, Dr. Campbell, Professor Keaton, and again, Dr. Myers for heading the committee. I'd like to thank the SWU Honors Program and Mr. Main, as well as the Presley family who hosted me while I was in England. My parents, because they're awesome. And also the rebel barons who opposed King John, because they're the beginning of our constitutional system.